Well, thank you for attending. Remember to sign your attendance sheet. I'm going to try to, so I didn't make any cartoons and I don't have any funnies, and if you're tired, I apologize. Because this is code material. I'm going to just hit the highlights. I probably won't be able to cover everything that was changed. In fact, I won't, but I'm going to hit the highlights as far as I see them, and you may have a different opinion, but that's... So we're talking about changes to the 2018 edition of NFPA 99 that affect our world. So my disclaimers and disclosures. So I'm employed, as you know, by Mountain Healthcare. I also have a side job for engineering. I volunteer for UHMS, PVHO, and NFPA, and this is my own opinion. It's not a full interpretation from any of those. So I want to present changes to the NFPA 99 Healthcare Facilities Code, the current edition, specifically Chapter 14, our hyperbaric facilities. And I want to talk about the process for the next edition. And then hopefully we'll have time to talk about any questions that may come up. So when we read the code, we'd have to start at the beginning. So if you look at the scope of what this code book applies to, and specifically Chapter 14, 1.112 is hyperbaric facilities. And so this applies to the design, operation of hyperbaric chambers, and the facility that houses the chamber for electrical, fire, pressure, gas hazards, and for medical purposes. This is from 0 to 100 in our world PSI, although I would encourage us to start using KPA. It's good value, most of the people know. So the little asterisk, if you don't know this already, I'll just go back. So the little asterisk after, when you see something in the code and you see a little asterisk, what does that mean? So that means there's an annex note. So annex note is not code language, it's information. And so one change for the 2018 edition I'm rather proud of. So for about, I don't even know how many editions, this has been carried forward, since the 80s. And it used to say, during the past 20 years, there has been a widespread interest in the use of oxygen at elevated environmental pressure, et cetera, et cetera. And it's about 5 paragraphs long, and it was a very, it was old. And we cut and pasted from edition to edition to edition. So this change that you're looking at, is everybody online? Can you see my webpage? I better make sure you can see that. Everyone that's online, can you see my page?
Yeah, it's scope chapter.
Okay. For those of you that are not and cannot see my screen, we changed some language in the scope of our chapter to talk about, we added current language, so we didn't talk about in the past 20 years and all of that. So you skip from Chapter 1 to Chapter 3. Chapter 3 contains all the definitions, and definitions are important because the words that we use have real meaning. For example, in 2015 edition, we added a definition for qualified. In other words, who's qualified to do the testing and maintenance and all of that for our chambers. So we added a word definition in Chapter 3. So what we've done for 2018, we've added some clarifying language to identify what we mean by atmosphere absolute, ATA, and there's an annex note that we added clarifying atmosphere of increased burning rate. So we typically understand that we try to keep our multiplex chamber below 23.5% oxygen. There's language in Chapter 11, which is the respiratory therapy chapter, talking about an oxygen-enriched atmosphere. So our chambers are not typically, the multiplex chambers are not oxygen-enriched atmospheres. When you're above 23.5% oxygen, you certainly are. But all of the language that's in the respiratory therapy chapter doesn't really apply to hyperbaric oxygen, so we wanted to add that. We put it in an annex note because it's, once you start putting language in the code, it gets really interesting. Different people apply it different ways. So it was sort of put it in the annex, that way it's not required. We added the definition of hyperbaric operations. So, as you know, CMS and their infinite wisdom, and then the Joint Commission has adopted it. So the surveyors are using the NFPA 99 2012 edition, and they're coming into environments, such as ours, and the language, the old language talked about the room housing the chamber shall be for the exclusive use of the hyperbaric facility. Well, what if you want to do a little wound care or something like that? So we identified what we mean by hyperbaric operation. So we put that in Chapter 3 to kind of help us, and that was code language. So hopefully the authority having jurisdiction can refer to that to help determine what kinds of things we would commonly allow in chamber room. So skipping ahead, I'm going to skip through all the other chapters because most of them don't necessarily apply to us. In fact, we have a statement in the code that talks about, unless we specifically mention it in our chapter, we don't mean for it to apply. And you'll see people trying to apply, again, like Chapter 11, respiratory therapy, to our chapter, which is sometimes not correct. So we've put a lot of focus on this edition to try to get people to understand that what we mean in this chapter is we don't care where your chambers are located. We are all hyperbaric facilities regardless of occupancy. And there's a new definition of healthcare occupancy floating around. So we used to talk about healthcare occupancy being more than 4 patients, 24-hour care, more than 3 or 4 days, that kind of thing. So anymore, the definition of healthcare facility is the place that you take care of patients. So it could be a business occupancy, it could be a residential occupancy. So this really opens up our chapter for use by the fire marshals and others. When you read Chapter 14, it's divided into 3 sections. One is back to the scope. We always start with what are we talking about. 14.2 is construction and equipment, and 14.3 is administration. So we did an interesting thing, and I'll get more into it later, but we added, we pulled all the different requirements for inspections, testing, and maintenance, and we put them into 14.3 under a section called ITM, because, at least personally, what I find irritating is you're always flipping back and forth within the code in our chapter trying to find well, what am I supposed to do? And, you get lost, and so hopefully this will help the users as far as having all of our requirements in one place. We added some risk categories. So 2015, so in 2012, all of the other chapters moved to a risk-based language whenever possible. And NFPA in general is going to risk-based language instead of prescription-based language. So all of this shall do this, shall not do that. We're trying to put it back on the user to do a risk assessment to make their own decision on whether or not they should be doing this. Some things are kind of just a given. You don't bring fire and electrical things that spark inside the monoplace, so we can stay shall there. But the things that we can combine with the same thought process for the other chapters, we're going to do that. So we're going to evolve as time goes by. And so 2015 we started to catch up to the rest of the book. And then 2018 we added some more. So currently we have Category 1 hyperbaric care for electrical and medical gas. And so Category 1 is considered, if you have an interruption or failure, you'll have major injury or death to either your patient, staff, visitors, or... So Category 1 is for electrical and medical now, med gas systems. The category 2 would be if, minor injury. So if you lose electricity or medical gas, you would have some minor injury to the occupants of the room or the chamber. And then finally we have category 3, where we have the same kind of thing, where it's not likely to cause injury to patients or staff for the med gas and the electricity. There is a category 4, and it's been reserved. We don't have a use for that right now, but we left it out there. And that matches definitions, the chapter on definitions. Applicable code. So again, back to chapter 3. This has a definition, and what you need to understand about the way people use the code is you look at the Webster's Dictionary definition of the words, and or what we say in chapter 3 of the code. So we added applicable code back to our push to try to get people to understand that healthcare facilities that are conducting any form of treatment and are not in a designated healthcare facility shall comply with the requirements of the applicable code. Right? So that sounds like we're saying the same thing over and over again. But we're really not, because it's a technicality. So NFPA 99 may not have been adopted in your area, and Utah is one of those. But there is no other chapter. And CMS and Joint Commission do refer to Chapter 14. So we kind of by default are the only chapter out there. So if your state or local authority is not using NFPA 99, this gives them the permission to use it because we're using that language. We made changes to fire extinguishment. So in 14.2, we added some alternatives. Back to, not every occupancy is a healthcare occupancy. Not every place that has a chamber has sprinklers. I mean, we're spoiled working in the hospital. So we're every room's sprinklered. We're really well protected. We've got, security and fire safety guys and facilities engineers that help us. But there are facilities, and quite a few of them actually, that are in business occupancies that may or may not be sprinkled. There's trailers, there's other types of facilities housing chambers. So we added some language. So small areas, you can use the local domestic water system. You don't have to have anything special. You can use a clean agent, and this has already been used over on the East Coast. They have a small area that they decided to install a clean agent extinguishing system. And those are rather complex and expensive, and you have to install them correctly. Otherwise, you could hurt somebody, but it's allowed. You notice that those are annex materials. So these are not code changes. These are things that we would allow. And then one thing that is in the code is 14.2.1.2.2. I think typically we do have fire extinguishers, but somebody noticed that we didn't have a requirement that you have one. So that was an interesting thought. For all these years we've had a fire code and we have fire extinguishers in the room. In fact, the UHMS surveyors looked for one, but when we looked at this idea of, well, where is it? Where does it say that in the code? We couldn't find it. So we put it in. So now we have a requirement to have ABC in the room containing the chamber. So cylinders connected to chambers. This one is actually very helpful. So anyone that's done the monthly walk around or has any experience with limits of medical gas in an area, we know that, for example, 12 E-cylinders is the maximum that you can have in a room per se. Yes, we've made a change to allow you to use an H-cylinder that's directly connected and ready for use to provide air for an air brake for a monoplace, for example. This is the typical use of a H-cylinder. And facilities have gotten in trouble because the surveyor or the health inspector or the fire marshal will walk through the room and they'll see the H cylinder in there, and now they may have 2 chambers or even 3 or 4 chambers, and they've got H cylinders in there. So now they've exceeded the allowed amount of medical gas in a room. So we added an allowance in the code for chambers that have a cylinder connected and ready for use. If this isn't for storage, it has to be in use. And so that way you can save yourself putting in the manifolds and the alarms and all the alerts that the med gas systems require, because that's expensive and complicated. So fire protection, more changes on fire protection. So we've always required you to have a means of communication. So we changed the language a little bit to allow that, let's say you have a cell phone and that's your plan. Well, in some facilities that might be fine. That might be your plan. But if the building housing the chamber has a central fire alarm system, like we do in the hospital, we're going to require new facilities. If you're installing your facility now, I want a pull station that's connected to the system, so that when you activate the emergency response, it's just a simple action of pulling the pull station. In our system, you would still have to call 3333 and get the emergency response moving, but at least the pull station would start that without someone getting on the phone. More on fire protection as far as what things that we've changed. We've added a requirement for a sight glass, so you have some sort of level indicator that has a remote display at the control console. So you've got a light, or even might be a red light, green light type thing, or it might be something else. But there's different manufacturers make different things, but you're going to need maybe something that just says full. I don't know. We're not going to require them give language to the manufacturer. There's different ways to answer the same question. But we're going to require that you have that information at the control. And then it seems pretty obvious, but we looked at different chamber manufacturers and different designs, and we decided to state the obvious. So if you're using a driving gas, the system shall be designed not to introduce air into the chamber if all the water is used. In other words, you don't want to start repressurizing your chamber after you dumped all the water out. So that was another light bulb moment for us as far as chamber design, and something that we would like to see going forward. So we had to say the same thing for Class B chambers as far as a means of communication at the control console. So it's the same language, it's just carried over from Class A to Class B chamber. So if some means of communicating to launch shall be provided, and if your building has a fire alarm system, you'll be connected via the pull system. Now, I won't go into all the changes we made in electrical service. So 14.2.9.2.1 with the annex notes, we made numerous changes. And the main thing we were looking at was not all hyperbaric facilities have a backup generator. And there's all kinds of horror stories coming out of the CMS adopting NFPA 2012. So they're requiring, even facilities that only do wound care Monday to Friday, they don't have a generator in the building for any of the services in that building, and you're getting a surveyor requiring that they install a generator. So we added some language to try to help that. But you need some means of backup power for, when you get out of the room. If it's a multi-place chamber, you have emergency lighting installed in the chamber. If it's monoplace chamber, is room lighting adequate to shine through the hall? Chamber intercoms, you want to be able to communicate with the occupants of the chamber. All the critical systems, alarm systems, if you have flame detectors installed, chamber fire suppression system, the controls for pressurization and depressurization, if any of those require electricity, you need some means. And some means is important because it doesn't have to be a generator. It can be UPS. Like in the monoplace, you've got a little 9-volt battery for the comms. But you clarified that language because we don't want people coming in and saying that's a generator. That was never our intent.
And staffing for tomorrow. I'll take this down to the right.
More on electrical service as far as, I'm not going to try to cover all of our changes, but we talked about 14.2, .9, .2.1, .1. Does somebody have a question?
Claire and Fred.
Hello?
Gail needs to mute herself.
Okay. So you want your electrical service, we added language to talk about the control and alarms are designed so that hazardous conditions don't occur if you lose power or when the power comes back on. We require the booster pumps for fire suppression, so if any of your fire suppression, for example, the handheld lines, are electrical, not pneumatic, then they'll be on separate circuits and not on the same circuit as the rest of the chamber. And then for small, back to the emergency generator thing, we specified that they can use Article 700 of NFPA 70 for some guidance. Don't have a generator. This was really big. Lithium and lithium-ion batteries. It's been going back and forth, and as you know, lithium-ion, especially the rechargeable battery packs, have caused some really big fires, and planes have caught on fire. Had some incidents with laptops and the Tesla motors, and there's lots of good examples of how well these batteries burn. So we did a blanket prohibition starting around 2012, and we've been watching and doing research. We decided to remove that blanket prohibition, and there were several reasons that we did that. Some of our language was unacceptable. You say, unless the product has been accepted or listed for use in hyperbaric conditions by the manufacturer. Well, in my experience, that's just not going to happen. Manufacturers aren't going to tell you that this lithium-ion battery is going to be safe in the chamber. And then the nationally recognized testing agency, who's going to pay for that? So we're putting the safety director and the medical director of the hyperbaric facility in an impossible situation. Lithium-ion batteries are everywhere. They can be used safely. There's other protections within our chapter and within the code on the battery and the use of the batteries. For example, we don't charge them in the chamber, which is typically where the lithium-ion batteries overheat, is when they're charging. We don't change them during the run. All of the other protections still stay in place. But it's a pretty big change for us and for the industry to start allowing those again. So you're still required, to understand that they're very good batteries. They burn really well, and so that caution should be taken if you're going to decide to use them. But properly maintained, correct for the device, contained in the device that they're designed for. I think a good example of using something where it wasn't designed with the e-cigarettes. I mean, there's pictures on the internet where people have blown half their face off, and some of those have happened because they're stacking batteries in there and they're using them outside of the design, so of course they overheat. So all of those protections on how we're going to use battery-operated devices still exist. So just by taking the lithium-ion batteries out of it doesn't mean we're going to stop looking at that. That's still critical issue. Emergency procedures. So we added a subsection similar to what we did with inspecting, testing, and maintenance. So we added a subsection in the 2018 edition to put all the emergency procedures in one place. So if you look in section 14.3, administration section, you can look for emergency procedures, and there's a place where we put all of what we expect, the minimum expectations for emergency procedures. Of course, any facility can have more, and I would suggest maybe these days active shooter is something that's not in the code, but it's probably something that we should have as far as something we do. And then the safety check. So this was something that we all do, and there's a UHMS position statement about this, and not new to any of us, but now it's in the code. So 14.3.1.6.1.3 with the annex note requires that we, prior to each hyperbaric treatment, a pre-treatment safety check to identify and remove prohibited items shall be performed and documented by a qualified person. And back to what I said earlier, we have a definition of qualified person. So if you look in Chapter 3, you will see the definition of qualified person. And in the annex note, I think we all know why we do these safety checks. Sheffield et al. Did a really great study that we all point to. The main reason for mishaps in our world is somebody took in something that was prohibited. So in addition to monitoring the prohibited items and stopping those from going into the chamber before the treatment, this further note is in the annex, so it's not required. But we're going to suggest that you build your safety check to look at patient identity, pre-treatment orders, appropriate safety measures, staffing, the textile is correct, and that is your patient grounded. Now, patient grounding for the multi-place is a different question than the patient grounding for the monoplace, but we with the annex note. Some of this comes from even the Joint Commission as far as their, right patient, right, it's similar to a surgical safety timeout. We didn't feel it was appropriate for our committee to build a safety check and post it. Everyone's got good ideas, and we wanted to just throw some ideas out there to see organically how this evolves over the next couple cycles. Textiles and chambers. We had some changes to that whole section on textiles and chambers. I think the biggest thing that we need to recognize, and this truly is big. So in 2016, I'll go back a little bit further. The UHMS has a ad hoc committee that's pretty much done this summer. It's called the Materials Acceptability and Testing Committee. And we've been working hard to develop a test that a manufacturer or a user could use. It was intended to be repeatable and inexpensive. And so what we managed to get through Wendell Hall was the contractor. We got language inserted into the 2016 edition of the American Standards of Testing Materials, G72/G72M. That's an existing standard, and it's for the AIT, in other words, autogeneous ignition temperature of liquids and solids in a high pressure environment. So that's not us. But we added a section in there, section 8.23, special case 2, for testing at pressures less than 2.1 megapascals or 300 psi. So there is a test now that we can refer, for example, Johnson & Johnson or 3M or Snapback, or somebody that wants to know is this safe especially in the monoplace chamber. So if it's safe in the monoplace chamber, it's probably safe in the multiplace chamber. So we're looking at, it doesn't answer everything, it's not a pass-fail test, but it does provide data on where is this material going, and what temperature is this material going to ignite, and it's in an oxygen-filled environment, less than 300 psi. So that was big, and we put that in the code. We didn't put it in the annex. So 2018, you can go to the section on textiles, and you'll find this specific reference in there for people, wound care products and textiles. Further on textiles, mostly the multi-place world, but again, back to monoplaces, the pillows and the covering for the mattress on the stretcher, the foam inside the mattress. So there's been numerous changes, and this would take probably 10 slides to try to get into this. There's continued controversy and changes to the upholstered furniture and mattress. In fact, I don't know, those of you that may remember that the 2005 edition got held up, so we had a gap in time between 2005 and 2012. We missed the cycle. We missed 2008. So that was because of a technical procedure that's called a nitman. So somebody really had a problem with what the committee's actions were on, and it wasn't necessarily our chapter, but the code in general. So they have to go, and it's a debate, and I had to go last year for the 2015 edition and defend the committee's actions on our upholstered furniture and mattresses. And we actually failed to keep the language that we wanted. The engineer that brought up the complaint was actually correct in the way that the standard that we were citing was being used. The problem is we don't have a standard that's specific to our environment. So again, hopefully this new ASTM test that came out in 2016 will help us. It will probably take 10 years or longer for kind of thing to evolve. But until we have something that's specific to our world, we'll continue to have trouble with mattresses and upholstered furniture. So I told you I'd tell you some more. 14.3.4, inspection, testing, and maintenance is new to the 2018 edition, and we have operational requirements for the preventative maintenance, the testing, and whatnot. We put them in one section. They are minimum items, and in fact, the whole code is minimum standards. There's no reason why you can't exceed or use something equal to using what the code is. So we also want you to think about, the hyperbaric chamber manufacturer, the support equipment, who made the compressors for multiplaces, like, do you have generators, do you have filters, all the ancillary support equipment, manifolds for the med gas, your breathing equipment, who made them, what kind are you using, patient care equipment. For us in Intermountain Healthcare, we're very fortunate to have, the clinical engineers and facilities to help us, but others may not, so we're just throwing out ideas for people to think about in addition to what's in our chapter. The PDH02 and service guidelines continue to evolve. Right now it's mostly about acrylic and maintaining the useful service life of our chambers, the acrylic, but PDH02 is evolving. They're looking at gauge maintenance, regulators. There's some talk about even putting fire suppression in monoplaces. So I don't know where this is all going to go, but PDH02 has taken a life of its own. So stay on top of that. And then, hospital or third-party maintenance should all be involved with your hyperbaric staff. Not, for example, you didn't want the person that does the fire protection for the sprinklers in the building coming in and looking inside the multiplace chamber and trying to apply that technology to the multiplace chamber. It just won't work. So you need to work together with the other party. So static sparks has been an interesting topic, and one of our main tools, as far as the monoplace world especially, for preventing fire, or at least having an environment of safety, kind of a culture of safety, is the protections for static. So we state that conductive accessories shall meet conductivity and anti-static requirements. We've added some language that the patient ground shall be verified in Class B chambers prior to each operation. That's not an annex note, that's code now. So before you start a monoplace treatment, you check the patient ground. And it's our intent that this step be added to the safety timeout prior to the treatment. And then that intent, of course, is not in the code, but that's code language now requires that we check patients in monoplace chambers before the treatment. And then as far as maintenance, in the inspecting, testing, and maintenance section, we have the chamber ground being verified as part of the preventative maintenance for that facility. So there's two separate steps that are happening there. Well, that's all I'm going to talk about as far as what changes are. I wanted to talk a little bit about the process. So the technical committees are required to be somewhat balanced, or as balanced as possible. So we have different categories of people on the committee. So there's manufacturers, there's users, there's special experts. For example, Tom Workman's a special expert. But we have Deepak Talati from Sequest Industry, who's a manufacturer. We have someone from OxyHeal. We have someone from PeriMed. So they're manufacturers. You have people like Rob Sheffield and myself and Richard Berry, who are users. We use the code. So try to keep them balanced. And actually, I'm really excited. We have someone from the FDA, and we have someone from Washington Department of Health under the category of enforcers. So these are people that are out in the world using the code, and I'm excited to have them on the committee, especially the FDA person. Because, the health department is helpful because they'll read it and they'll correct our thought process. Because we think we know what we say. We're a small community. Hyperbaric medicine is we all kind of know each other. We all feed off each other. We have great ideas. We have poor ideas. But we need somebody from outside of our world to kind of check us and say, I know what you meant, but that's not what you said. So having someone like that on the committee is really great. And then I hope that we've had several different people from the FDA sit on our committee. None of them have really engaged. We've got a brand new one, so I'm really hoping that they engage. So back to how it works. We've got this committee, and we have to respond to public input. So anybody, if you've got internet access, you can make a public input for the 2021 edition. You have to do so before June 26th. And that pretty much sets our agenda for the next edition. The committee is allowed to make our own public input, but it's better if someone else puts it in, because actions generated by the committee are subject to a different level of attention. But anyway, so if you made a public input about something you felt strongly about, we have until December 31st to address it. We're meeting in August, so that we'll start looking at any public input that came in before June 26th. And then after that meeting, the cycle opens up again in January 2019 for what's called public comment. So let's say you put a public input in. You think that we need to start prohibiting lithium batteries again. So you put your argument in your public input, and you put it in there, and you said, actually, I'll talk about one I'd like to see. I'd like to see the requirement for an alternative source of breathing air. For example, our Rager masks that we're using in the monoplace world. I'd like to see that go away. I went back and looked, and there's no requirement for that for a Class B chamber until 2005. It was a multi-place thing until 2005, and then I don't know why, but the committee decided somebody must have put a public input in And so now everybody's required to have them. So having used these for numerous years, the only time I ever see them used is during drills. And I wonder if the ICU might not have more trouble getting rid of getting their people to a place of safety than we would. So maybe they should be required to have it also. Anyway, I think it's complicated, and I think a public input to get rid of them would be awesome. So that's a real item. We'll see if that happens or not. But, let's say my public input is, instead of requiring you to have one, I require you to have a risk assessment on whether or not you should have an alternative source of breathing air outside the monoplex chamber. So you do your risk assessment, and if you decide that you need to have it, great, have it. If you decide you don't, that's great too. You've done your risk assessment. I think that's probably a better answer than what we've been doing over all these years. So anyway, we put that in as a public, and the committee will have to talk about it and decide what we do. So January to next June, it's called public comment. You can look online and you can read what the committee did. It's all very transparent. And if you disagree and you think we didn't understand what you meant, you can make a public comment and you can challenge our actions. Or if the committee made an action that didn't go through the public, we just did it on our own, and you didn't like what we did, this would be your opportunity to either disagree or even simply just make a comment. And then after those come in, we have another meeting, and we have until January of 2019 to take any action. Typically, that's the end of the code, unless there's really some big issue, for example, the textiles that we talked about. So we would go, that would be the 2021 edition. You could look at actions taken after the meeting after June in 2019. And unless there's any really big issues that have come up, that'll be the draft language for the 2021 edition. And then it would be final after the June. And that is how the process works. And it's all very open and transparent. If you need help looking at it or understanding it, I would be glad to take a call or email and help you, because I think of all the code committees that are out there, the NFPA is very open and transparent as compared to, for example, the Compressed Gas Association or ASME PVHO. You can get information, but it's like pulling teeth. Once you understand the NFPA system, you find that they're very open. And with that, I'm going to close it and ask for questions or discussion.
So, hey, Jim, Len here.
Yeah. Okay.
I have a question. Let me shut the door because I'm getting feedback. The question is, you mentioned gauges, that the NFPA has interest in gauges. Okay. Do they have interest in measuring pressure properly and systematically at hyperbaric chambers? And getting rid of gauge pressure? And you know where I'm going with this. We've had talks about this. You've had an abstract or something about this in the past, that the influence of altitude biases the pressure. We're not all talking the same thing. So does the NFPA have any interest in going there?
So to clarify, that was for the ASME PVHO 2 standard. They are going there. I think you were part of the public input that we put in for 2015, trying to get NFPA to go that direction, and it was voted down. They felt that the pressure gauges was not a fire issue. So,
well, I didn't think it was either, but you just mentioned a minute ago that the NFPA now has interest in gauges.
Oh, let me clarify. That's the ASME PVHO group that I was talking about.
Okay. Sorry. All right.
Under other things to think about, inspection, testing, and maintenance section, we added a list of other things to think about, and that standard, the ASME PVHO 2 is one of the things you need to add. It's not just NFPA for preventative maintenance. That's where I'm going.
Okay.
But yeah, we could probably try and get something into ASME, because they're looking at gauges and how you take care of them and all of that.
Well, it seems to me that they ought to be talking the same language as ASME. So why not?
Yeah. No, I don't have a... It'd be a good public input. Any other comments? Okay. Well, thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Jim.
Hey,